right is. Is it specifically abortion? Is it liberty? Is it autonomy? Is it privacy?
The right is grounded in the liberty component of the 14th Amendment, Justice Thomas, but I think that it promotes interests in autonomy, bodily integrity, liberty, and equality. And I do think that it is specifically the right to abortion here, the right of a woman to be able to control without the state forcing her to continue a pregnancy, whether to carry that baby to term.
And happy Friday and welcome to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. I did say Friday. We're not here on Saturday because it's the July 4th weekend. Val is off for the week, but I'm here and we have a special edition of The Deal. We have one guest today and we're going to concentrate on her because she has something very important to talk about. It's Tara Romano. Tara, I'll let her introduce herself and her organization, but I don't want to waste any time because I know you're very important. You got a lot to do. So Tara, welcome to your first visit to The Deal.
Well, thank you so much for having me. So I'm Tara Romano, and I'm the executive director at Pro-Choice North Carolina, which is we're a small organization, but we are a state-based organization. We do grassroots advocacy for the full range of reproductive rights. So that includes being able to prevent pregnancy, being able to terminate a pregnancy, and being able to safely carry a pregnancy to term.
Yeah. So Tara, the reason why I wanted you on with us today is clearly that the decision on Dobbs and all of the fallout from it effectively ending Roe versus Wade. Mm-hmm. So let me just ask you the first question. What's your visceral reaction to the decision? And did you ever think that we would get to this point where Roe was even going to be in question?
Well, so I've been at Pro-Choice North Carolina since 2016, and I came May of 2016, right before Trump was elected. And actually, a colleague the other day, on actually the day that the Dobbs decision came down, reminded me that I had said that they were going to overturn Roe. I don't quite remember that conversation after Donald Trump was elected, but we certainly knew it was a possibility. And particularly, like, for one thing, when it comes to like the anti-abortion movement, I hear what they say and I believe what they say, and their goal was to overturn Roe. And once they got 3 justices that were going to do that, those 3 justices appointed under Donald Trump, like, it felt like that was coming. And then especially when they took up the case from Mississippi, the Dobbs case, which was a 15-week ban, which on its face under Roe was unconstitutional. And so the fact that they took it up with that particular makeup on the Supreme Court, a 6-3 anti-abortion majority, it felt like they weren't taking it up just to sort of finally settle, like, no, you can't keep doing these unconstitutional laws. It felt like they were taking it up specifically to either gut Roe or overturn it completely. Now, we weren't necessarily sure that they were going to overturn Roe when they took up the case. Like, it felt like one thing they might do was allow the Mississippi law to stay in place, which would be a complete undermining of Roe. But still leave Roe in place, which is in some ways like a political decision to say, well, Roe is still in place, although we've completely gutted it. But honestly, on September 1st, when they allowed Texas's 6-week ban to go into effect, which effectively banned abortion for most people in Texas, and when the Supreme Court didn't step in to do anything about that, I think that's when I started to think, they are coming for Roe, because that effectively ended Roe in Texas on September 1st. And then of course there was a leak on May 2nd, the evening of May 2nd. And that was when I think we could be like, it was upsetting to see, definitely, but also was, we wanted to assure people like this wasn't the final decision. We still had to wait for that. Abortion was still legal in all 50 states. It was tense waiting for the Dobbs decision. It's always tense at the end of the Supreme Court Supreme Court term when they have so many big decisions. And so certainly last Friday, for me, the surprise was the timing. I really thought it would be the final decision that they dropped. So when they released it last Friday, like, it felt hard. Even as prepared as I was. And we were in a state, actually, and we'll go, I know that's another question, where North Carolina actually has protected abortion access, and it still is legal here, but it still felt hard to know that in states clinics are shutting down and people are no longer able to access that care. And people, were in waiting rooms and they could no longer have their appointment. It still felt really hard to know that was a right that was just stripped away.
Yeah, it was really shocking to me. I think I had prepared myself for it too. I wasn't sure when it was going to come, but I knew that's, with the court configured the way it is, it's almost impossible to stop. It's a freight train. I didn't ask you about this before we came on, but you did mention Texas. I am curious about something. Texas had this really funky, weird thing where you could turn in your neighbor.
Yeah.
Essentially. Did that get addressed in this? Did that settle that question? Anything at all about Texas? I mean, you just made me think about that.
So one of the reasons that the Supreme Court said they couldn't do anything about the Texas law was because it wasn't enforced by the state. It was enforced by private citizens. Now, the Supreme Court, can basically do what it wants for a lot of things particularly when it comes to law. They can say, we don't understand this law and we're going to put a stop to it until we figure it out. Like they could have done that. They chose not to. And I think, so that is still in place. And, I have colleagues in Texas who are sort of trying to figure out how you navigate around the fact that you now have private citizens who, they were able to do this anyway, but what is it, how emboldened maybe do they feel now to be trying to attack abortion providers, focus on or try to attack like abortion advocacy organizations. I think that they also will try to target people seeking abortion as well. I know that's something that the anti-abortion folks say that they don't want to do, but we already have seen people seeking abortion been criminalized and targeted. And that happened in Texas, actually. They had arrested a young woman who had children who I think maybe was trying to self-manage an abortion, and they arrested her. That was sometime in May, I think. It wasn't too long ago. And so they are doing those kind of things. They released that person because she wasn't actually, like, they couldn't hold her. She wasn't actually breaking the law, but they still tried it.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to remind you, you're listening to The Deal. If you're listening on the podcast, on any of the platforms, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, wherever you can catch us. If you're watching us online, the video that's on Spotify, on Facebook, and all those other platforms as well. So we're happy you took the time to come in. I'm happy that I could get Tara Romano from Pro-Choice NC, because what I'm concerned about is, we're here in North Carolina. We have listeners all over the country and actually in other countries that listen to this show. But let's get down to brass tacks. Your job, your day-to-day job, you try to serve women here in North Carolina, and the organization is Pro-Choice NC. However, the real thing is, in practical terms, how does it change access to health care for women? Because, a lot of times, because it's so reductive on the other side, right? They just say it's an abortion service, so therefore it must be immoral, or whatever their reasoning is, right? But we know that sometimes people have to have abortive services because it's medical. How does this change how you serve women today in North Carolina? And then talk about some of your colleagues around the country. You mentioned a little bit that they were already having trouble.
So at Pro-Choice North Carolina, we're strictly an advocacy organization. So we don't provide like direct services, but we do work with, we are connected to like providers and clinics who are providing services. And in North Carolina, we worked hard to be a state in the Southeast that when the Roe decision was overturned, when the Dobbs decision came down, nothing changed at the moment in North Carolina. People can still access abortion as they were prior to the Dobbs decision being released last week. Now, we don't know how long that will last. Because it's become completely political. Like, I appreciate what you said about, like, one of the things that people opposed to abortion have done is really removed it from the healthcare aspect. Abortion really has been around since people have been getting pregnant. Like, it is part of the continuum of reproductive healthcare. That includes, trying to prevent a pregnancy, carrying pregnancy safely, having an abortion. Like, it's all part of that. And it's been effectively, in our political debate, removed from that to be then just like a political wedge issue, as opposed to being like people have all kinds of reasons for accessing abortion, and some of those reasons are to do with medical reasons, health and safety reasons, economic reasons, equality reasons, reasons of the experiences of the people accessing abortion. So we're fortunate in North Carolina that we do have the access we do now, but because it, as I mentioned, is so political, the election coming up in November is going to be really critical, because it is now, there are no longer federal protections like there were under Roe. So it always has been in the states, really, for a long time. The issue has been in the states, but now it completely is in the states. So what we're anticipating is like helping people understand like what's at stake and how the elections are going to play into that.
Well, talking about what's at stake, one of the things that I also been concerned about is you heard Clarence Thomas on the way in of the program, and he's asking the Solicitor General, where does this right come from? And he doesn't do a good job covering up what he really believes, right? Even in the oral arguments, it was pretty clear where Clarence Thomas was going, is that there is no right to privacy, right? So it extends to birth control and those kind of things. So I guess my next question is what is next for these opponents of supposed choice? They're not opponents of choice. I think they're opponents of bodily autonomy.
For sure.
I'm trying to say this right, and what further restrictions could they impose? And you mentioned no federal protections. You think they want to codify them? If they got in office, they would certainly codify that abortion services would mimic what you see on the state level. Don't you think so?
For sure. I mean, you're right, absolutely right, that it is an issue of like people being able to make their own personal decisions. And this is a personal decision. And throughout our history, people have understood that this has been a personal decision. And it's, and it's a decision that is wrapped up in so many things. It's like your life experiences, your relationships, your families that you have, your health, your safety, all of these things. And so it was, and again, like, Roe was decided around this privacy issue. And of course, I mean, Griswold v. Connecticut, which was in the 1960s, was a Supreme Court decision that legalized birth control for married couples. They had to go for married couples first, and then later single people could get birth control. And that was considered privacy as well. Same with same-sex marriage and sexual intimacy laws like Lawrence v. Texas. And so these are all things that certainly Clarence Thomas has mentioned in his dissent. And we know that actually abortion is one part of this, trying to sort of have this it's a very conservative religious vision of what people should be allowed to do. And I think it also really comes to also saying certain people have rights in this country and a lot of us, the rest of us don't, I think is also a big thing too. Like, and your rights can be absolutely taken away by the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court, I think from the history's founding was really not necessarily set up to serve most of the people, right? And we've been sort of moving towards granting rights to a lot more people as we move forward. And now it feels like we're in this very much a backlash of taking away these rights.
Yeah, so we're talking to Tara Romano of Pro-Choice NC, a very good conversation to have in light of the Dobbs decision. Tara, one of the things I've written about extensively, when Donald Trump started in office, I continually was writing about the Supreme Court and its ability to affect people, and people sort of having blinders on and thinking that there were some things that were sacrosanct, that there was no way that they would overturn Roe, that there's no way they would overturn Loving or Paul or any of those things, because every time those Supreme Court justices go for their confirmation hearings, they always say, "Oh no, I believe in stare decisis, and there's no way I would," And then so Susan Collins and those, Joe Manchin and those people allowed those nominations to go forward. So here's brass tacks. What can the coalition of pro-choice supporters do? We know voting is one of those, but what do you think you can do right now, knowing how lopsided the court is?
I mean, it definitely can feel disempowering to look at how the makeup of the Supreme Court and what can be done. I mean, I definitely know that there are people who know judicial processes and Supreme Court better than I do, who talk about like expanding the Supreme Court, trying to do some court reform. And it does feel like there have to be ways to consider that the Supreme Court is supposed to be part of the checks and balances, right? The three branches of government. And right now it just feels like there doesn't seem to be any appetite for creating some balances and checks on the Supreme Court. And these are lifetime appointments of people who were not elected. And it was 6 justices who decided to take away this right from millions of people in this state. So I think, there can be some action at the federal level. I mean, certainly anytime the Supreme Court hands down a decision, also Congress can make laws to mitigate that decision. They can, now it feels really hard to do that, but it can be done. And so I think about, we don't want to give up at the federal level, but it does feel like there's not as much we can do there in North Carolina in particular, because we do have a fighting chance to be able to protect abortion access in North Carolina in our next election. We haven't passed any abortion restrictions in North Carolina since 2016. We got a governor who would veto anti-abortion bills, and we've been able to uphold those vetoes. And we are going to, as long as, we still potentially can do that through 2024 while Governor Cooper is in office. Of course, there is going to be a push from anti-abortion lawmakers to get the supermajority back in the November elections, which means that then even if the governor vetoed an anti-abortion bill, they would be able to override that. And we also think that they would want to then override bills around that are, attacking trans youth and LGBTQ community, bills attacking immigrants, because a lot of these things are really all connected in this sort of vision of who has rights in this country, who matters in this country, and who doesn't.
Yeah, we didn't talk about it beforehand, but you bring up trans and LBTGQ. I got to get everybody and Latinx and African American coalitions or whatever. How do you see those groups kind of coalescing? Have you been in communication with, say, NAACP or a Latino group or LGBTQ group?
Yep.
That
absolutely
help out. Yeah.
I mean, we have, we're a small organization. So I believe in working in coalition. And so we work a lot in coalitions. And so we are connected to all those groups. And we included, those groups joined us in condemning this decision. We work together around voting rights, work together around immigrant rights. Like, we know that these things are all tied together. And so, it's just, and helping people to understand that, because it really does, there is still that strategy of just dividing us all into our silos, and then we're not as strong together. When really what we're seeing is like, these are all attacks on democracy. I mean, of course, attacks on voting rights are attacks on democracy, but attacks on like who can be considered citizens and who can have a say in how our government runs, what people can do with their personal lives, what they can do, when it comes to like discrimination and all these things, like who is allowed to be discriminated against, who's allowed to discriminate. Like, these are all part of our democracy. And so these really are all attacks on democracy. It's attacks on who actually has a say in how our government is run. And right now, feels like it's rolling back, saying that most of you don't have that say. And so that's what it feels like.
Yeah, most definitely. I'll take a opportunity to encourage people to make sure that we're going to make sure that we post links to Pro-Choice NC.
Thank you.
In your programs and the things that you guys are doing. Before we run out of time, what's the best way to support you guys? And like I said, our audience skews heavily to college educated folks who are actively participating all the time already. They're in organizations already, but they may not know anything about Pro-Choice NC. So here's your opportunity to plug the organization and talk about what you need to be able to carry out your mission.
Well, I mean, we are a small but mighty organization, just 3 people. And so we're at prochoicenc.org. A lot of what we do is really trying to help people develop, have the tools they need to do the advocacy they need for their communities. We definitely want to develop a deep bench of folks who can speak to this issue and can advocate, and to talk about one of the biggest things that really allows abortion restrictions to go into place and got us to the point where Roe v. Wade was overturned is there's so much stigma around abortion. I mean, there's stigma around miscarriage and pregnancy and parenting and a whole lot of things, but especially around abortion. So this is something that 1 in 4 American women have experienced, yet we've often let the narrative be dominated by people who are opposed to it. So they have set this narrative of a lot of things that are not true, a lot of deliberate misinformation. And people, I mean, one of the things we need is for people we have resources for people to learn more about the issue and to speak up about it. We always like people to call their lawmakers. We have information on our website about how you can contact your lawmakers, what's going on at both the state and federal level, including local levels as well. Because now we're at a point where local governments can also do things to stand up for abortion access. So definitely, of course, donating to our organization. We have rapid response listservs. We have social media. And then, helping us with our coalitions as well. Like I want to mention the Carolina Abortion Fund is a close partner that they directly provide funds and logistical support for people seeking abortion. And so you can always donate to us, you can donate to them, but certainly really want people to get involved. I think this has been an issue that has been siloed for a while. And we've seen all across the state, people take to the streets in ways that I wasn't sure they would. And because we've all, a lot of people are tired. There's been a lot of stuff happening. We're still in COVID pandemic. But people really are taking to the streets, particularly young people. And I think we want to have people understand like that energy is needed. For one thing, it just shows that people support this and that this is not something that is reflective of the majority opinion in North Carolina or in the United States.
Yeah, most definitely. Tara Romano, I appreciate you taking the time on short notice to come on with us.
Sure.
This is, and for people who are catching us, this is a special edition of The Deal. We're here a day early. Val's off for the week, and Irv and Dr. Nicole McFarland, she's cavorting in Jamaica, so she won't be in with us this week. But Tara, any last thing you want to tell anybody? Do you have anything coming up that people could attend, or are you going to be appearing anywhere, speaking anywhere, anything like that?
Well, actually, if folks are in the Triangle and Raleigh area, on July 9th, we'll be doing it's a rally, but it's more like just sort of a festival with a lot of our partners, our coalition partners, including Planned Parenthood, Carolina Abortion Fund, El Pueblo, a lot of voting rights organizations. It'll be in Raleigh. And you can look for our website for information, but that'll be a time for people to come gather together, talk about how we can make sure we protect abortion access in North Carolina and how we can help get our democracy back. And so we'll be doing that on July 9th in Raleigh.
Yeah, well, great. And I'll make sure I have a link to that on the website as well. So, folks, that's Tara Romano with Pro-Choice NC, prochoicenc.org. Everybody stay right there. We're going to take a short break. When I come back, we need to talk about the 1-6 committee hearings, and we'll wrap it up for the week. So stay right there. We'll be right back after this message.
Healthcare is about being seen and heard.
Healthcare is letting me be unapologetically me.
Healthcare is contraception.
En Planned Parenthood, primero es la salud.
Healthcare is knowing I have an STI and learning how to tell my partner.
Healthcare is HIV testing.
They took care of everything I needed. It was fantastic.
It's not going to the doctor for women's care or for men's care. It's going to the doctor for me.
El cuidado de salud es positivo por ser positivo.
It's about becoming a mom when I was ready.
Healthcare is my Pap test, my breast exam, my cancer screening.
Healthcare is access to safe and legal abortion.
Healthcare is trans care.
Mi salud es Planned Parenthood.
Planned Parenthood is healthcare.
This is healthcare.
And welcome back to our second and final segment for today of The Deal. I'm Ed Clark. It is Friday, July 1st. And I did say Friday and July 1st because we were recording a little bit earlier this week. It's the 4th of July holiday weekend. Val's off for the weekend. But I did not want to let the week pass without talking to somebody in the pro-choice movement about their reaction to the Dobbs case and the ending of Roe versus Wade. And that was Tara Romano of Pro-Choice NC, who was in the first segment with us. Again, there'll be links to prochoicenc.org on the website. There's some programs coming up. If you're in the Raleigh area on July the 9th, there will be an event coming up and you'll be able to get information about it on Pro-Choice NC. Before we get out of here today, I do want to spend some time on a couple other issues, but I'll backtrack just a little bit. One of the things we played in the intro to the program was Clarence Thomas and him talking about his concern about people believing that their rights to privacy. My problem with Clarence Thomas and his position is that it puts a lot of other things in jeopardy. We talked about it with Irv Joyner last week. And among those things are whether or not you can marry the person you love, whether or not you can take birth control. There's been a lot of things that have been determined to be available to us because of the right to privacy, which Clarence Thomas is skeptical of. What we have now is a court that, at being 6'3", and it's a little shady because sometimes Roberts will attempt to do the right thing, but never fully does. But you have an ideological court that's driven by a theocratic position. I am not going to sit here and denigrate anybody's religion by any means. You believe what you believe. Now, that withstanding, everybody does not believe what you believe. There's some other cases that came down this week that sort of are knock-ons of this Dobbs decision. And one of those cases had to do with being able to pray after a sporting event at a high school. I want you to take a look at this clip, and then I'll talk about it when we come back.
This is the case of the coach, the assistant football coach out in Bremerton, Washington, who had a habit of praying on the 50-yard line immediately after games. The school district told him that he should not do that. He should find a more private place to do that because people would think that that was somehow the school endorsing his religious views or a particular religion. But today, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 in favor of the coach in a decision written by Justice Neil Gorsuch. It said the free speech and free exercise of religion clauses of the First Amendment protect his expression. And it says a proper understanding of the Constitution doesn't require the government to single out private religious speech for special disfavor. So the reason the Supreme Court says is that he could do this is because he was not in the classroom. He was outside the classroom after his normal duties as the football coach. Now, so the
courts decided that this football coach who had been leading the prayer at the end of the game, he's saying that it's not coercive. He's not making the kids do it, that they can do it. What that opens up a Pandora box is if I live in a community, and I could talk about a community right here where I am in Mooresville, North Carolina, most of the people there are from South Asia. What if somebody decides they want to do a Muslim prayer or a Hindu prayer or Sikh or whatever? What will people in the community say? Is it Christian only? And all of these decisions by the court that are very suspect and point at trying to strip away some of these privacy rights have this undercurrent of that America is some Christian country. Well, obviously Thomas Jefferson disagreed because he talked about this separation between church and state. We don't have a theocracy here. There is no Church of the United States. There's no Anglican church like they had in England. And we threw out the monarch for that reason, because that monarch was supposedly installed by God. And then therefore, United States, had we maintained that system, we would still be part of the British Empire. We are not, which brings us to the 4th of July, which is the holiday that we have coming up. And we know good and well that everybody was not free on July 4th, 1776. But neither were they free when the Constitution was ratified later in the 1780s. And we know that not until the 13th Amendment did people enjoy even some citizenship who look like me. One of the things that's happened here in America is that we have decided that we don't want to deal with history. I got one of our dedicated listeners, Brenda Alston from Raleigh, North Carolina, sent me a message, and she said, one of the things that you need to do is talk about civics, how all this stuff works. And I think the reason why we find ourselves with Dobbs and with this decision about praying in the middle of the football field and Griswold being under attack and some of these other things is because people don't know how the court works. The Supreme Court is extremely important. I think one of the things that people don't realize is that it can have a massive effect on your life, but you're going to know it now. And Tara Romano talked about some of those things that, it may end up that people, after they realize the harm that's done, say somebody has to carry a child to term and then the mother dies. Now, that's going to change opinion, but do we have to get there? And that's one of the things that I think people should be concerned about. One last thing on Dobbs in the Supreme Court. There are a lot of states that had trigger laws, as you can see from the map here, that so immediately as soon as Dobbs was settled, those states started banning abortion services or limiting abortion services as much as they could. So now women are on the move and having to go to other places to seek services. Me being here in North Carolina and Tara Romano being in North Carolina, right now there are some protections for abortion services. I'm not sure that's going to stay, and that's what we need to be mindful of. Let's switch gears real quick. One of the other big stories, obviously this week, is the 1-6 committee. Let's take a look at a clip about some of the testimony this week in the 1-6 committee, and we'll talk about it, and then we'll try to wrap things up.
I just had an interesting conversation with Rudy. Mark, sounds like we're going to go to the Capitol. He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, there's a lot going on, Cass, but I don't know, things might get real bad on January 6th.
Ms. Hutchinson, Mr. Meadows is engaged in litigation with the committee to try to avoid testifying here. What was your reaction when he said to you things might get real bad?
In the days before January 2nd, I was apprehensive about the 6th. I had heard general plans for a rally. I had heard tentative movements to potentially go to the Capitol. But when hearing Rudy's take on January 6th and then Mark's response, that evening was the first moment that I remember feeling scared.
Mr. Ratcliffe was nominated by President Trump to oversee U.S. intelligence, our U.S. intelligence community. And before his appointment, Mr. Ratcliffe was a Republican member of Congress. As you will see on this clip, Director Ratcliffe's comments in December of 2020 were prescient.
My understanding was Director Ratcliffe didn't want much to do with the post-election period. Director Ratcliffe felt that it wasn't something that the White House should be pursuing. It felt it was dangerous for the president's legacy. He had expressed to me that he was concerned that it could spiral out of control and potentially be dangerous, either for our democracy or the way that things were going for the 6th.
When you say it wasn't something the White House should be pursuing, what's the it?
Trying to fight the results of the election, finding missing ballots, pressuring filing lawsuits in certain states where there didn't seem to be significant evidence, and reaching out to state legislatures about that. So pretty much the way that the White House is handling the post-election period, he felt that there could be dangerous repercussions.
So one of the things that seems to be clear from the testimony this week is that Donald Trump knew what was up. He planned to go down to Congress and do what, I'm not sure, to lead his crowd of people down. I'm not sure what the ultimate goal was, but one of the things we heard in that clip was that Donald Trump was aware that people in that crowd had weapons. He didn't want the magnetometers turned on, which would have detected whether or not people had weapons. There were also police that reported over the radio that they saw people with AR-15s and sidearms and shields and combat gear, because these guys like to play like they're in the military. One of the things that's clear here is that Donald Trump has decided that he's above the law. And the only way to pull this back is to eventually, in my book, is to see him prosecuted. Now, whether or not that happens, that's still up in the air, but it's up to Merrick Garland. We've talked often on this program about whether or not Merrick Garland either has the cojones or the guts or the evidence to charge Donald Trump. Clearly, there are people now who are willing to testify and talk about Donald Trump and what he knew, and Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan. The other thing that you'll hear is that people ask for pardons. And let's play a clip of that real quick, and then we'll talk about that.
And are you aware of any members of Congress seeking pardons?
I guess Mr. Gates and Mr. Brooks, I know, have both advocated for there to be a blanket pardon for members involved in that meeting, and a handful of other members that weren't at the December 21st meeting as the preemptive pardons. Mr. Gates was personally pushing for a pardon, and he was doing so since early December. I'm not sure why. Mr. Gates had reached out to me to ask if he could have a meeting with Mr. Meadows about receiving a presidential pardon.
Did they all contact you?
Not all of them, but several of them did.
So you mentioned Mr. Gates, Mr. Brooks.
Mr. Biggs did. Mr. Jordan talked about congressional pardons, but he never asked me for one. It was more for an update on whether the White House is going to pardon members of Congress. Mr. Gomer asked for one as well. Mr. Perry asked for a pardon too. I'm sorry, I need to finish.
Mr. Perry, did he talk to you directly?
Yes, he did.
Did Marjorie Taylor Greene contact you?
No, she didn't contact me about it. I heard that she had asked White House Counsel's Office for a pardon from Mr. Philbin, but I didn't frequently communicate with Ms. Greene. So if you ask for a pardon, or if you continually take the fifth, which, I suppose, the Fifth Amendment right is a valid right. You don't want to self-incriminate. But then to go ask for a pardon, to me, implies that you're guilty of something. What do you need a pardon for if you haven't done anything? And so one of the things that's clear to me is that there were people who were in constant communication with Donald Trump. There were people who told Donald Trump that if, in fact, he went ahead with his plan, that he would, in fact, be in some legal jeopardy, and perhaps they would also be in jeopardy and therefore need a pardon. Now, I don't know how much more clear and explicit you can be about that. What I think has happened is that Donald Trump has felt above the law. And what has to happen is that has to be reconciled. Donald Trump has to be called into account. And I hope that's where we're going here. Well, this has been a special edition of the deal. I don't want to prolong this anymore. We're going to take this weekend off, so no program on Saturday. I want to thank Tara Romano from the NC Pro-Choice NC, Pro-Choice NC, prochoicenc.org is where you can go and find her. There'll be some other links out on the website. Please make sure that you subscribe on any of the platforms. Like I said, Stitcher, Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, you name it, we're there. You can also watch the video podcast on Spotify, but you can also watch it on Facebook and on YouTube. Sometimes we're on Venmo. If you go to the website as well, you can watch it there. Please share this with your friends and family and folks that just need to know. In the coming weeks, we're going to have more guests. We're going to do more of these specials where we have long form interviews with folks like Tara Romano. So obviously, everybody has a different opinion about the 4th of July. Some people celebrate it. I don't necessarily celebrate the 4th of July. My holiday was a week or so ago, Juneteenth, that I look to. But for those who are going to be doing something for the 4th of July, please be careful if you're doing fireworks or whatever. Leave it to the professionals if you're going to do that. And in the meantime, go and do something good for somebody today. And then we'll be back next Saturday, which will be Saturday, July the 9th. And with the regular program, Val will be back, and then we'll continue to look at all the news
from around the world. Again, thanks to Tara Romano from Pro Choice NC. Have a good day.